what has happened here is a separation. And while there are two themes that are associated with 9th and 10th Psalm, what you'll find out in the four oldest Hebrew manuscripts that we have, and one of them particularly, the Dead Sea Scrolls, and then you have the Greek Septuagint, which is the 286 Alexandrian translation by Jewish scholars in Egypt in 286 BC. Then you have the Latin Vulgate, and all of these, there's 4, 5, 6, and probably Jerome. You have 7 manuscripts from antiquity that all have the 9th and 10th Psalm as one body of truth. Okay? You don't have a divide. And so instead of having 150 Psalms, you have 149. See? But that's a lot of verses, if you will. That's a lot of verses to manage in a type of study. And so the context, it does change. The subject matter, rather, does make a variant. It does change. So what they did is to break it right here and establish the 10th Psalm. Okay? So if you're looking in, for example, Lupo's work, H.C. Lupo's work on the Psalms, looking in Kyle and Delitz's Hebrew word studies on the Psalms, you'll find no title or no author of record for this psalm. And if you want the author and the title of record, then go to the 9th Psalm and you'll find it right there. You'll find it right there. And that helps you in dealing with the particular matter of subject. Now this psalm, we're going to call it Psalm 10 for the same reason someone in 1050 A.D. in Spain broke it in the 10th Psalm, because it's easier to manage. All right? This psalm deals primarily with the wicked, qualifier, among the congregation of God's people. Doesn't deal with Mr. Joe Blow out on the street, or Billy Jack, or old Saint Sally Sue, never darkened the door of the church building in her life. That's not what this deals with. This deals with the pew packers, okay? This deals with those that sit in God's house, sing God's songs, bow their head to prayers uttered toward God, even give toward the work of God on the earth. And these are what's called in Scripture ungodly. The word ungodly means unwell worshiper. Now, that's rough, isn't it? That's hard to manage. So we say those that do not worship well. So the word ungodly means those that do not worship well. And there's a distinction in the King James translation between the wicked and the ungodly, because there is. The wicked generally refers to those among the heathen, and the ungodly to those among God's people. And you can learn that in, of course, a study of the Psalms and other places. And so this psalm will deal primarily with the wicked, or use the word ungodly. I probably should have put it in parentheses there on your outline, but you can pencil it in. This psalm deals primarily with the ungodly among God's people and is a prayer. Now this is all right, brethren. This is all right, brethren. This is all right, brethren, to pray for God to crush them, to stop them, to remove them from the congregation. Why? Because it disturbs the peace and the harmony and the work and the efficiency, and how about some other words? Give me some others. Of the congregation. Paul said it in Titus. We just studied it, remember, in chapter 3. What did he say about an argumentative person? Yeah, he said after the first and second warning, give them the boot. You know, the right foot of fellowship. Yeah? Get them out of there. Why? Because they are destroying the momentum of godliness. Okay? You think, man, preacher, you sure are hard about this. I've dealt with it. And I have come to believe what God says. How many of you have done that? Have you come to believe what God has said in your life? Have you done that yet? When you come to see things as God sees them, you get another notch on the ladder of spiritual growth. Jeremiah says, God said to Jeremiah, that's enough. Don't pray anymore for this people. Don't do it. John would write in 1 John, he said, you don't pray for a brother that's sinning a sin unto death. He said, don't do it. Man, that's hard. Well, it's not any harder than the person that has known Christ and returned again to the world. He has become like what? A sow that's been washed, to the wallowing in the mire, and a dog that's returned again to his own what? Yeah. Now, how's that? Well, we don't like to go there, do we? Why? Because, well, hard. Yeah. But when it interferes and stymies the work of God, get it out. Get it out. People have surgeries. They have surgeries because something. If you've got a cancerous finger, you amputate that thing. If you I knew a lady in Idaho, very loved lady, made probably the best chicken spaghetti I've ever eaten in my life, and she had a bad thing on her foot, wouldn't heal, and she had retired as a nurse. She had diabetes real bad. No. Finally, the doctor come in there and said, Miss Jensen, if you don't let us take that foot, it's going to take your life probably in less than 2 weeks. So she gave up her foot for her life. She gave up her foot for her life. I'm telling you something, leadership in the church requires, and I think one of the reasons where we are in the nation and in the church is because leadership has melted like candle wax rather than be firm and be thought of as hard-hearted. When leadership requires hard decisions, it always will. It always will. Doesn't matter if you're a sheep herder leading sheep, a rancher with cows, you have to make some hard decisions. You've got to decide out there who's going to be of the bull kept on the place and which one of them is going to be gone down to the market. You've got to make some hard decisions sometimes. Look at this psalm. It deals with the wicked among the people of God, the ungodly, the ones that are causing great fits. Look at the first psalm, would you? Look at this. He says in verse 4, but the ungodly are not so, but are like the shaft which the wind driveth away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. You see that? They will not stand in the congregation of the righteous. For Jehovah knoweth the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. You cannot let that permeate the congregation. Now, that's what this psalm's about, brethren. That's what it's about. It's about interior ungodliness, not about what's outside the fence. It is a prayer to God for God to bring disaster on them, curse upon them, stop them before they stop us. That's what it's about. In the first place, the ungodly are not interested in the well-being of the congregation. They're interested in themselves. It's an insidious poison, and it can permeate through the whole congregation. The Apostle Paul said a little leaven does what? It leaveneth the whole lump. So this is a lesson in what to do about cancer in the congregation. Now let's read the psalm. Why standest thou afar off, O Jehovah? Why hidest thyself in times of trouble? He calls it trouble. Why hidest thyself in times of trouble? In the pride of the ungodly, the poor is hotly pursued. Let them be taken in the devices they have conceived. In the devices they have conceived. That's why this is called an imprecatory psalm, because it is to entreat, to invoke, to call down by prayer, curse upon the ungodly. And that's what he does. Let them be taken in the devices they have conceived. In other words, let them be caught in their own traps. For the ungodly boasts, in the ETH there, present active indicative, they just keep on boasting, okay, of his heart's desire. And the covetous renounces, yea, contemneth with God. That's an archaic word, that's that parallelism. One word's renounce, and the other word is basically the same, contemneth. It means to renounce God. The wicked, or the ungodly, in the pride of his countenance saith, he will not require it. For some reason, these kind of people always consider themselves above the judgment of God. I don't know why that is, but I know it's a fact. The wicked in the pride saith he will not require it. All his thoughts are, there's no God. In other words, God doesn't see this. God doesn't care about this. His ways are firm at all times. Thy judgments are far out of his sight. You know, in his mind, he's standing on the rock. Standing on the rock. Boy, it's the hardest kind of people to get moved to, is to get them off the rock. Thy judgments are far above, out of his sight. Individual cannot see above the rims of his own glasses. For all of his adversaries he puffs at them. He saith in his heart, I shall not be moved. To all generations I shall not be in adversity. His mouth is full of cursing, deceit, and oppression, or fraud, one translation says. Under his tongue is mischief and iniquity. He sitteth in the lurking places in the village. So he doesn't do this just out in front of everybody. Oh, I know, Brother Joey's a good old boy. You know, we all love him. Yeah, we do. And he means well, you know, he really does. But, well, I don't know. You know, I don't know if he ought to be an elder or not. Yeah, but we love him, and, you know, wouldn't want anybody to hurt him. No, wouldn't you? No. And that's the way that trash goes around. That's the way it goes around. And it's sold like that. Whether it's the preacher, the elder, or some other leader in the congregation, that's the way that trash is sold to someone that'll listen. So it's not, no one gets up in front of the congregation and says, Billy Jack has a black eye, and I saw him get it, and I think he needs to step down. They won't do that. They just kind of in the dark places and just kind of scattered around and at the fringe of the congregation. You know why it goes around at the fringes of the congregation? Because the fringes are where the weaknesses are, not in the center or the heart of the matter. If I'm lying, I'm dying. I know how this works, brethren, after 46 years of preaching. I know how it works. I recognize the attacks. I've seen good men destroyed by this kind of stuff. In secret places doth he murder the innocent. He destroys their heart. He destroys them. His eyes are privately set against the helpless. He lurks in secret as a lion in his covert. Have you ever walked through the woods knowing there's something in there better than you are? That's poor grammar, but you know what I'm saying? Ted Kingery and I walked from a village in Russia to the main gate of Bidarbashan. Had to pay another bribe to get back in. Had to pay a bribe to get out and open the gate, and then had to pay a bribe to get back in. But we were glad to pay the bribe to get back in. I'll tell you why. We were about 5 miles from that gate, and a villager passed us. And Sergei was with us, and that villager's, you know, in that Russian stuff. And Sergei, he kind of paled a little bit, and we said, hey, the guy went on, and we said, Sergey, what did he say? Why is he so excited? Beautiful afternoon stroll through them big forests. Had about 5 miles to go to Bitterbershan. And he said, well, they saw a Siberian tiger, a few minutes ago along this trail, and all the villagers are hurrying to get home. You know what Siberian tigers do? They eat people. And Ted and I picked up the pace, you know what I mean? If you look behind, there was a dust trail. We picked up the pace. Why? We didn't know where that rascal was. Lying in wait. Now, that puts a whole nother dimension on lying in wait. When you're in the woods 5 miles from a city or protection, and there's a 600-pound cat out there that kills for a living, that gives, Megan's going to Thailand in the summer. One of my feats in Southeast Asia was to kill a tiger, but I was using an M60 machine gun when I killed it. And I can't imagine trying to kill one with my little bitty pocket knife, on the trails of Bitterbershan. He lurks in secret as a lion in his covert. You know how they hide in the grass? And they wait. And they wait. He lieth in wait to catch the poor. This word poor can mean the uneducated, can mean the simple. It generally doesn't particularly have to do with financial status or ability. Just those that this individual considers less than himself. He doth catch the poor when he draweth him in his net. He counteth, he boweth down, and the helpless fall by his strong ones, his tactics. He saith in his heart, God hath forgotten. He hideth his face. He will never see it. And the psalmist prays, arise, O Jehovah, O God, lift up your hand. Show yourself, you see. This is that cry, that to invoke God's help. Forget not the poor. Wherefore doth the wicked renounce God? They deny you and say in his heart, thou wilt not require it. Thou hast seen it, for thou beholdest mischief and spite, to require it with thy hand. The helpless committeth himself to thee. Thou hast been the helper of the fatherless. Break thou the arm. Look at that. Break his arm. Why break his arm? Helpless. That's the idea. See? When you've got a broke arm, you're a little bit short of that right cross. You know what I mean? You're hung up in the cast, And so this is the idea. Hey, this is a man that is called in the Bible most after God's own heart. Okay? So don't attack me and say, boy, that sure is mean, and I can't see that, and don't attack me. This is the guy that wrote this that's called the closest to God's own heart. Okay? What you're dealing with is so vile, so destructive, so deadly, that it calls for strong measures. This is not huggy-poo, kissy-poo time. This is swift kick time. This is swift kick time. This is strong discipline time. When this kind of individual is identified, this is time to move with a strong hand of discipline. That's what it is. That's what it is. And so, it's kind of like that old story I've told several times. The young girl sitting on the park bench, the moon's over there, great, big in the sky, and he has her hand, tightly in his, and the sweat's running down, and he says, oh, honey, I love you. I can't give you that home in retirement that, Bertram Elliott can, but I want you to know I love you so much. And I can't give you those trips over to Europe every summer, and all of that vacation time like Bertram Elliott could, but I love you. And I can't give you that, 2 cars in the garage and that 5-bedroom house and 3 baths and all that like Bertram Elliott could, but I sure do love you. She looked down into his misty eyes and she said, I love you too, but tell me more about Bertram Elliott, And that's kind of what this is, You can talk love if you want to, but the nitty-gritty here still has to be applied. Congregations are lost because leadership will not come on with strength. Homes are tore up. Lives are shredded. Children are displaced, moved out of schools. Homes are destroyed by this kind of guy. Yeah, and then the elders come, well, Brother Crowley, there's a movement in the congregation, and we're sorry, but we're going to have, the movement's usually 1 or 2 people. And the elders or the leaders are not strong enough men to stop this poison when it gets started. And that's how it gets started. So preachers get run off. The front pew in hell is going to be full of people that have run preachers off, because they are the servants of God. And this kind of individual is the kind of individual that creates the problems that precipitate that running off. This individual is a despicable toad. And every congregation has 1 or 2. And if you allow them their poison to work, it will destroy the momentum, it will destroy the magnitude, it will destroy the wonderful work of God if you allow this kind of thing to work. And so if you think I'm pretty harsh on it, you're right, because I've been affected by it. My dad's been affected by it. My brother's been affected by it. My brother-in-law's been affected by it. We that preach have dealt with this. Fred Hall will be affected by it. And we love him dearly. And he and I have talked about some of the hazards he'll have to deal with. Here's what he says. Wake up. O God, lift your hand. Wherefore doth the wicked renounce you, and say in his heart, thou wilt not require it. Thou hast seen it. Behold the mischief and spite, to require it with thy hand. The helpless committeth himself unto thee. Thou hast been the helper of the fatherless. Break the arm of the wicked or the ungodly. And as for the evil man, seek out his wickedness till thou find none. Rub this thing out. Jehovah is king forever and ever. The nations are perished out of his hand. Jehovah, thou hast heard the desire of the meek. That's the prayer of the psalmist, the meek, the one under God's own hand. See, that's what meekness is. Thou wilt prepare their heart. Thou wilt cause their ear to hear, to judge the fatherless and the oppressed, that man who is of the earth may be terrible no more. Here's the difference. The ungodly, the one that creates this kind of insidious, poisonous mess, they are of the world. Their spirituality is that of a worm. And the songwriters used that before I have, for such a worm as I. And so if you want to find yourself in the barrel of worms, just pay attention to this type of individual. The ungodly and their insidious poison. And it's all right, brethren. It's all right to entreat, to pray, to invoke, to call down God's judgment on that individual through prayer. It's all right to do that. Why? Because when this gets started in a congregation, it becomes a desperate struggle for the very survival of the home and the congregation. And don't let Satan win. Be strong enough to stand up. Be strong enough to stand up and say, no, I don't run. I'm not leaving, because God's work here is not done. I'm God's man, and I'll know when it's done. And then the assurance to know, verse 16, 18, you know God hears your prayers. There's your strength. Now, these type of people make 4 errors. Same 4 errors all the time. Wherever they are, and every congregation has them. So you can't say, well, this doesn't apply, because it does. Every congregation has them. The errors made by the ungodly that are found among the congregation, and these are based on a low spirituality. Always are. Always are. A very low-level spirituality. If you know of individuals like this, you hear this kind of muck-muck going in the congregation, talk to some of their associates in the community, and you'll find out about them. You'll find out their spiritual level. Just do a little investigation, and you'll find out this guy's not worth listening to, or this woman's not worth listening to. Always weak in the faith and has a poor concept of God. Number one, they believe that the trouble will never come home to them. That's what they believe. They believe it'll never come home to them. And you know, most of the time they're right. And the reason they are is because leadership caves into this for the good of peace in the congregation. And there is no peace. There is no peace. Number two, this type of individual has such a limited spirituality, they cannot see the eternal purpose of God. They cannot see in the mission. They cannot see in the overall scope of what we're involved in, that it is bigger than you and I, that it's bigger than ourselves, that in our pettiness we cannot see beyond the county fence. And so we're just interested in what pleases me or doesn't please me or something like that. And number three, they have forgotten the real matter. And actually, whose church it belongs to. It's the church of the Lord Jesus Christ. It's His church. It's His people. And He puts people in it where He wants them. He does. God will put Fred somewhere. God put Mike Crowley here against everything that shouldn't have worked. And Fred and I were talking about it at the table at the potluck. Against everything that shouldn't have worked, and here we are. Against everything that said we shouldn't have stayed, and here we are, 26 years. And I can't answer all the questions of why. But I know this, it's God's plan of action. God has this. I'll tell you why Obama's in the White House, because that's where God wanted him. Sometimes God gives a nation what they want instead of what they need. And that's the book of Daniel in itself, in one sentence. And so you're where you are because that's where God wants you. Bob is an elder in this congregation today because God moved him here, prepared the work for him, and he is here serving as a shepherd of this congregation because that's exactly where God wants him. That's where God wants him. Some reason he came back to Matador, Texas. I know what it was. Bob is the big bucks. Yeah. I tell you what, it's Walmart down here on, 6th Street, right? Something brought him back because the Lord would know that I would desperately need him. Desperately need him. In a moment in the congregation where it could go either way. And I desperately needed Bob Kilmer. And I have the sign, y'all, that's been in my house over the back door. As you go out our back door, it's still up there, isn't it, Loretta? And what's it say? It does. And I have those posted in my house because I pray for these two men every day. When I go out the door, I pray for Bob Kilmer and Bob Campbell. When I'm shaving at the mirror in my bathroom, I pray for Bob Kilmer and Guy Campbell. I pray for these men because God has put them here for a purpose. I pray for Fred. God will put him in some congregation to suit God's purpose. I would hate to be the one that would be opposed to God's purpose, and then blame it on something else, personality clash or whatever you want to call it. So that person this ungodly individuals have forgotten that there is an eternal purpose at work here. If I didn't believe that, I'd quit tonight. I'd quit tonight. There's an eternal purpose here. And number 4, false thinking. That God, well, we've already read this, so you know where I'm coming from. God will not require it of them. For some reason, you just skate along, do all that muck and stuff, and that's all right. I'm on a mission from God to destroy lives, cut people's heart out with a dull rock, say ugly things to them, and that's all right because I'm on a mission from God. And they do not realize that God will bring them into account. That's what this psalm says. So it changed subject matter from the nations in Psalm 9 to the congregation of God's people in Psalm 10. In verse 4 and verse 11 are key. Let's look at it. The wicked or the ungodly in the pride of in his own presence saith he will not require it. All his thoughts are, there's no God, or God will not bring me to judgment. And look at verse 11. He saith in his heart, God has forgotten. You really think God has forgotten the tears that you've created, the heartbreak you've caused, the sleepless nights that are a product of your work? You really think God has forgotten that? False thinking. The figures of speech are pretty powerful, aren't they? Look at verse 8 and 9 again. Yeah, he hides. He hides. He lurks in secret. Why? Takes advantage of those that he perceives that he has the advantage of, the poor or the helpless. These kind of people don't jump on the strong. That's one reason that Brother Guy Campbell is such a good fit for us. Because he is a strong character and individual. And people don't jump on strong things without a lot of forethought. But someone they perceive as easily to attack, they do. They do. And so this lion will do it in a sneaky way, won't he? And try to catch the poor in the snare. Verse 15, boy, that sounds ugly to me, but break his arm, Lord. What's that mean? Stop him. How's God going to do it? I don't know. But I know prayer works. And just stay faithful to the calling. Stay hitched. I know I've talked to people in this community, and I've said, well, why don't you come and worship with us? I understand you used to worship with the Church of Christ. Well, yeah, but so-and-so down there, and, blah, blah, blah. And sister such and such and this, and said all that. You know what they forget? They forget the teaching of this psalm. And so they feel like that no one will take up their cause. And so they don't come back. And you can't talk them into it because their faith is such, it was so tender at the time they were hurt, that you can't convince them to come back and that it'll be all right. Because they cannot believe that God will take care of it for them. They just won't believe that. They just won't believe it. I know a particular guy that baptized Judy Ann. His name's Paul Lehman. Lives in North Little Rock. He's destroyed by a congregation doing what we're talking about. One of the finest gospel preachers I ever heard in my life. That congregation is going to answer in the judgment for that fine man. For that fine man, his wife will not even consider going back into ministry. Every time that Judy and I would stop by her and talk to him, she'd go to crying. She was hurt so horribly by 2 or 3 brethren that ended up getting them run off. And I'll tell you something about that church. It's down to about 10 or 15 people. And when Judy Ann was baptized there, it was running about 350. God removed their candlestick. Why? Because the leadership did not ask God to break the arm of these individuals. And so you read this psalm and you study this psalm, and you will see with me that there is a severe side to the judgment of God. And the righteous take consolation in knowing that God will take care of it. He may not do it tomorrow, next Monday, or next Friday, but God will take care of it. If this seems like a pretty stout, strong lesson, it's intended to be. That's the way the psalm's written. I love the 23rd Psalm. It's such a sweet thing. It is. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in the green pastures plenty, by the still water, not the fighting, turbulent type thing. Isn't that a pretty psalm, and it brings peace in your heart? This is not a pretty psalm. It's not. Nor is it written pretty. This is about an insidious poison that's at work through the working of Satan that finds itself in the congregations of God's people. Therefore, it has to be dealt with harsh. Has to be hit and hammered hard. Because there's sweet psalms we can look at later, but this is not one of them. I appreciate your attention. Study this psalm. Read it for yourself and look at the references that are found in this psalm. And find out why David makes no apologies for saying, break his arm, Lord. Break his arm.